This is Jonathan Pedro. Welcome to the Symbolic World. So hello everyone. I thought that for this month's Patron video, we could discuss the structure of opposites and how the center relates to the question of opposites, or the left or the right hand. We've talked a bit about that quite a bit, left and right hand. And so there's a certain particularity which in relations to opposites, especially understanding the idea of the left and the right hand, which is that as soon as there's a duality, the duality sets itself up in a certain way, which is that one part of the duality represents the unity and the other part of the duality represents the multiplicity. So think about any structure that is one. As soon as you separate, into opposites, then all of a sudden you get that basic structure, and it has to do with the right hand and the left hand, of course, because the left hand is always a stand-in for the multiple, whereas the right hand is always a stand-in for the one, or a movement towards the center, and therefore is related to unity itself, whereas the left hand is a movement towards the multiplicity from the one into the many, or from the inside to the outside, and therefore is related to the outside. And so you will see that this basic duality happens all through the scripture, and there's reasons why it is done that way. So a good example, very simple example, or the first example is, of course, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And so you have this basic duality, God, heaven, and earth. And you will notice that in that duality, all of a sudden, God is in heaven. God is above, right? God is that's why we say our Father who is in heaven. But right away, God is identified with that which is above. His abode is in heaven. There's all this description of God being above. And so in the duality, heaven and everything that's related to heaven becomes a stand-in for God, and earth, which is chaos and void and absence and all of that, becomes something like the opposite, becomes an image of absence of God, you could say. And so the truth is that it's not ultimately completely true. That is, what I mean by that is that ultimately the unity transcends the duality truly. But as soon as the unity enters into a dialectic, enters into duality, then one side of the duality will tend to represent the unity itself, and the other will represent the externality. So in terms of heaven and earth, in terms of God, in terms of that, in some ways there's something like, you could say, something like a public vision of that, which is the light part. And so, heaven and earth is the best example. And so the manner in which the heaven represents God in being light, being spirit, being wind, being that which patterns, being that which, the clock in the sky, the stars that move, that pattern our reality, that pattern the world, all of that becomes an image of the Logos himself, of the Word of God speaking. And then the earth, the chaos, the void, becomes the absence of God. But then it also, the left hand, or the other part of the duality, also, it becomes two things. On the one hand, it becomes something like the absence of the center, or the distance from the center. And then also it can represent something like the manner in which that being cannot be totally contained by the center. Now, what do I mean by that? And so it means that the outside duality, the dark part, the left hand, all of that type of imagery will represent you can imagine it like, let's say you have a center and a periphery. And a good way to understand that is that the periphery goes lower and the periphery also goes higher, because the periphery in some ways shows the excess, or shows the way in which the center and the way of and the representation doesn't contain it all. And so that's why, of course, you'll always find images of the darkness, the divine darkness, right? The darkness of God, the idea that God is beyond all name, beyond all representation, beyond all speaking, and so that kind of apophatic language is referring to this kind of excess, or this more than what the representation can contain. And so that image of the darkness of the heaven and earth, and of the darkness and unformedness above, can become an image of that which is beyond our representation of God. The Saint Ephrem the Syrian talks about the womb of God. There's this idea of the divine nature as being beyond all that can be spoken. There are different ways in which it's represented. Eckhart talks about the ground of divinity, that is this aspect of the infinite which is beyond any possible speaking, beyond any possible representation. So you can use speech and silence as an example, which is that you have a kind of lower silence, which is the absence of speech, or the awaiting for speech, the unformedness, and you have a kind of silence which is above, which is the incapacity, or the transcendent representation. Okay, and so once you understand that, you'll notice that a lot of the symbolism of duality will tend to take on that role. If you follow my videos, you've seen me talk about different figures. For example, in iconography, the right hand and the left hand figures, Saint Peter, the Mother of God, and then the left hand, which is like, let's say, Saint Paul, and then Saint John the Foreigner, that have this kind of wild aspect to them, and have this kind of outsider aspect to them. Saint Paul is a Roman. He's also the least of the apostles. He's all this kind of stuff. He represents himself with all this kind of left hand characteristics, as being a shapeshifter, as being we even says he's an aborted apostle, right? He's like something. He says that he's the aborted apostle. I forget how he phrases it, but he has all this kind of symbolism of this outside. So you can see that in that opposition itself. And of course, the same symbolism happens in the symbolism of masculine and feminine. And this is harder. This is why I'm doing this as a patron-only video, because in some ways this is more mysterious, and it comes in some ways to the way in which Jordan Peterson has been criticized for saying that women, the feminine is chaos, right? And so it has the same structure, and I've seen medieval thinkers who intuit this. Even strangely enough, in the Malleus Maleficorum, I saw that, where when the people that are attacking the witches is saying that women are more susceptible to becoming witches, and he says that women have the two extremes. They are more susceptible to becoming saints, and also more susceptible to becoming to being influenced in that way, because and so they kind of go higher and they go lower at the same time. This is, of course, symbolized in scripture in many places that might surprise you. When, for example, it says that a woman is the glory of her husband. That the woman is the crown of her husband, that type of language that is hinting at this idea of that which is below in the image of heaven and earth, and male and female, is also in some way secretly has this relationship up with that which is highest and secret. Of course, you see that already in the description of when I talk about how St. Ephrem refers to the womb of God, the divine nature, which is beyond all saying. And so now, one of the problems of this is, like, once you understand it, you'll see that it's pretty much everywhere. As soon as you separate things into dualities, you'll have this inside-outside struggle. That'll be the main shape of the duality. Will be kind of an inside-outside thing. And it has led people to misunderstand this symbolism. And so if you know a little bit about strange religious practices, like the occult and tantrism and all these kind of strange, what some people have called left-hand paths, you can see that it is truly a misunderstanding of this type of symbolism. It's people who have had insight into the idea that there's a mystery in that which is excluded. There's a mystery in that which is outside, because it is a signification of that which transcends the identity. But at the same time, people confuse the higher part of that and the lower part of that. And so people confuse the difference between something like a crown, which is placed above you, and waste, which is that which is pushed away from your body or let's say eliminated from the body. And so they think that by engaging with one kind of behavior, that they will reach the highest one. But the truth is that usually that leads to people's destruction. It's what happens when people kind of engage into that type of behavior. But what I mostly wanted you to understand is mostly to see how this basic duality works, which is that if you take St. Peter and St. Paul, you have the right hand of St. Peter, who is the foundation. He's the head of the apostles. He's the rock on which Christ built his church. And then you have St. Paul, who is the outsider, who is the least of the apostles, who is the apostle to the strangers, the apostle to the Gentiles, and all of that is happening. It gets even more complicated. And this is where it gets really subtle. And some people will not be able to follow me all the way into this. But nonetheless, here we go. Which is that there's also a manner in which the right hand, or the part of the duality which is related to identity, also in some ways, let's say, is a microcosm of the whole process. So because it's a microcosm of the whole process, it also contains the opposite in it. It will also contain the other side, let's say, contained within the identity. And so that's why, St. Peter is both the apostle to the Jews, the apostle to the inside, the rock, the foundation, and everything. But then he becomes the one who also falls down into the water. He becomes the one who also, at the same time, has to eat the strange meats. He's the one who notices, the cloth that gets opened up, and that he is faced with this kind of strange mixture of meats. And you can see that in the image of the keys, which is that St. Peter, as an image of the center, is the key that opens and the key that closes. He's the key that binds and the key that unbinds. And so, and you can look at the symbolism. I'm using examples, but you could find many, many examples. You could say that the image of the Virgin also has that in her. And so although she's an image of the concentrating, right, the one who gathered in her heart, she's the one that's closed, she's the one that covered. She has all that kind of imagery, which is facing the imagery of St. John the Forerunner. Nonetheless, she also contains in her a kind of secret aspect, which is also of the other side. And so even her name, which means Mary, which means Mara, is just related to Mara and to this idea of bitterness, is hinting at the fact that she also, let's say, contains within herself the other side, the side that is also this kind of chaotic potential. So she contains it properly, you could say. And that is the best way to understand, why it is that Christians don't have this kind of weird left-hand path type symbolism. We don't have tantrism, because what we have is a center that is the way to let's say, rectify or to participate in the higher aspect of the mystery, without getting lost on the outside. And that's why the imageries of the center, let's say the cross, let's say also the communion, contains within themselves the aspects of symbolism that are both creative, but that are also excessive, right? That are life and death kind of contained in the same imagery. The cross is said to be the fountain of life, is said to be, the new creation, is said to be all these things, but it's also someone who's dead on a cross. And the same with communion, which is said to be, the food of life, the bread of heaven, and all that stuff, but is also the strange imagery of eating the body and blood, and especially the blood. There is no, how can I say this? There is no precedent for that in the Bible. The idea of drinking blood is there's no, like, you could say that the communion is a repetition of the sacrifice that is in the Old Testament, kind of an accumulation of all the symbolism into one. And that's true, but the blood is always sprinkled. The blood always goes into the ground. The blood is never consumed. And so the fact that we Christians consume the blood, and that is our central symbolism, and that it kind of gathers everything together, is to show you how our, there's a way that you can reach the higher aspects of the left-hand symbolism, you could say, but it's not through engaging the left hand itself. It's actually through the center, right? It's actually going through the center that you can purify, or that you can avoid the dangers of all the messiness of left-hand symbolism that you find in other traditions. And it's really important to understand this, because it has to do also with sin, like, if you think about it, and so think about the mark and the center, and then think about the sin as missing the mark. And so you have that opposite, right? You have the center, the right hand, that which gathers into the middle, and then you have the sin, or the left hand, that which is awkward, and that which moves away, or is crooked, or goes away from the straight and moves into the outside. And so there is a mystery about sin in Christianity, but the mystery is not that you should sin, right? It's not the idea that sinning is good. St. Paul talks about this in Romans. It's not the idea that, okay, well then, since sin manifests how the center does not hold, manifests, the exceptions and the way in which the crooked moves away from the center, then you should sin, to manifest non-duality, right? To participate in non-duality. We have nothing of that sort in Christianity. The idea is that it's through the center. And so, that it's like by rectifying your sin, by moving towards God, then you will find that in retrospect, the sin was an opportunity to move higher. The sin was an opportunity to participate in glory, but it's not the sin itself. It's not the sin itself is dangerous. It'll lead you astray. It'll destroy you. But the transformation of sin through the center is what can actually transform it, into something like a glory, because it's an opportunity to be transformed and to become more than what you were before. And so hopefully that makes sense. This is a little more difficult and esoteric, but maybe you can meditate a little bit on the symbolism of the right and the left hand, the symbolism of duality, and notice how it tends to manifest itself in that way. That the duality always tends, the one side of the duality, you can say the right side, the right-hand side, tends to be a stand-in for the center, and the other aspect of a duality, which we could call the left-hand side, ends up being a stand-in for the outside. And so I think this little meditation is enough. And so thanks everybody for your support. A lot of things have been going on in the symbolic world lately, and there's been the publishing, there's been all these talks, there's been all this stuff going on, and so we've had the new website, the new circle community, and so really everything is is growing and getting better, and it's important, and I appreciate the support that people are giving us, because a lot of the support that you're bringing us is going into building this and just continuing to make it grow, and it's making it possible for the symbolic world to create the content you want, and also to publish the books that we hope you'll find interesting, to do all the great things that we're trying to do. So really appreciate what you're doing. So everybody, talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.